Hello, today is January 20th, 2025. Today is Martin Luther King's Day. We celebrate Martin Luther King's birthday. That is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he, to me, as a person that doesn't know a whole lot about him, but know the basics. I'm just a layman, a person that has read some articles, some stories about him, have read some of his speeches, have listened to some of his speeches, and have also admired him. I have admired him for many years. I have admired his movement, the civil rights movement, which I know it wasn't started by him, but he was a very central figure, perhaps the most known figure during that period, during that struggle, era, movement. And he, to me, is a person of very high stature. It's almost inexplainable, the statue that I hold Martin Luther King. And to skip over that, I'd like to mention how he is very misunderstood, I believe, by most people. And this has probably a lot to do with the way the media and the way our society in general and even schools portray him and tell the story about him, tell the stories about him. And this is the same in the media or social media, where he's often quoted as having a dream and just his, I would say his belittle to that one speech, the I Have a Dream speech. He is limited. He is shrunk to that one speech. But I believe, as I have learned, he's a lot more than that. Not only that speech, but what the speech meant, what the speech was about, which, as I recall, was about unity, was about the inclusion of all peoples, not only in America, not only people of color, but all people throughout the world, the unity of all people. And in his dream, as he put it, he sees that we ultimately will come together. It's a remarkably powerful speech and one that brings me to tears every time I hear it, almost every time I hear it. So even just thinking about it, I'm choking up. But if you have not heard it, I highly recommend it. Highly recommend you hear it, especially today, a day like today, Martin Luther King's Day, 2025. Today, January 20th. And I don't want to belittle the speech, saying that he's limited. His persona is limited to that one speech because it is among the most powerful speeches that I've heard, and it is grandiose. That speech is just inexplainable, unexplainable to me, how the way he delivered it and the meaning behind it. Of course, that wasn't the first time that he said the speech. I think there is a speech that I've learned that he basically delivered sometime before that first time that most people heard it. But that's beside the point. That's really not important. The important thing is that Martin Luther King was a lot bigger than those ideas that he delivered in that speech. Again, I highly recommend that you do listen to that speech. I would probably put the link for that speech where I post this video. Most people have heard of the name I Have a Dream speech, but they really have not listened to it or read it. I recommend you do both. If anything at all, listen to it and listen to it very carefully and stop whatever you're doing and listen to it and think about every word that you hear. That's the only way you're going to get the full meaning of what he says. And it applied to his time. It applies to our time now. So it is, I believe, timeless. It is that powerful. And his skill in delivering it is unmatched. I believe it will not be matched. So listening to the recording of his delivery is probably the best thing. There's probably a lot of people that have read it and done recordings on it, but I recommend listening to the original. I believe it was, off the top of my head, I may get this wrong, but I believe it was in 1952. I forget the exact date, but I will put the information down below. So look for that. Don't quote me, but just to jump into what I believe as a person of low information about him. I have some, but like most people have very little information about him. Most people have read and seen and researched and found out very little about Dr. Martin Luther King. But what I have found is very extremely revealing with the little bit I have found. And again, it has only been a few years since I have listened to very few of his stories, his thinkings, mentalities, his thoughts, his ideas, his way of thinking, way of life, his beliefs, religious and otherwise. And with that little bit I had a chance to learn about him. It is almost overwhelming. Imagine learning a lot more about him. But I believe that he got a lot of his ideas and thoughts, especially those early thoughts and way of thinking, from Mahatma Gandhi's, if I'm saying that name right. He is the Indian man that ultimately led to the liberation of India from the rule of the British Empire. This was back in the 1920s, 30s, perhaps 40s. But he had a lot of his ideas from him. Nothing wrong with that. Everyone gets their ideas and their teachings from someone. But it was quite interesting that not only him, but other figures throughout history have gotten their ideas from Mahatma Gandhi. And the basic idea that he got from him, that I know it's one of the core ideas that Martin Luther King attempted, and he did bring to us, was the idea of nonviolence. The idea of nonviolence, and not only that, and direct action, which were both ideas that Mahatma Gandhi, if I'm pronouncing that name right again, he also pioneered that. And of course, Gandhi may have gotten that idea from somewhere else. It doesn't matter. The, the important thing is that they work and they were applied both in Gandhi's time and Dr. King's time. And more importantly, direct action. Yes, nonviolence is extremely important, I believe, but they're both about the same in the importance that they bring. But Martin Luther King, he stressed the need for direct action, not only for nonviolence and being calm, even in the face of, you know, of violence, of threats, in the face of maltreatment, mistreatment. So he stressed nonviolence. Basically, you have to remain calm even when threatened with violence and keep the moral high ground. I believe he may have called that that concept, that maybe something else, but keep the moral high ground by maintaining your nonviolence and at the same time perform direct action, meaning that when you protest or when you need to uh, put your point across, you need to basically do it. You need to valiantly, even in the face of, again, mistreatment, of threats, of even violence, you need to get your point across. Speak your mind. Say what is it that bothers you. Say what is it that you see as unjust or unjust. Say, and don't let things just go by. Don't let things pass and take whatever injustice, punishment you see in the street, at work, at home, in school, everywhere. When you see it, you bring it up. When you see something wrong, you bring it up, because he even said silence is basically agreeing with whatever ill or bad or wrong you're seeing. He worded it another way, but basically that's what he meant. There comes a time that being silent is basically being compliant and in agreement with what's going on, whether it's wrong or not. So you need to voice whatever you see as wrong, whatever you know is wrong, because it is known when something is wrong, unjust, when something is basically abusive. So that's two ideas that he brought forward and that many people don't even mention, which is nonviolence, but with that nonviolence comes direct action, meaning putting your body on the line and putting yourself on the line for a good cause, a just cause, for justice, for righteousness, for whatever you think and you believe and you know is right, the right thing. Basically, the right thing to do is for you to stand up and stand against and opposing what is wrong, injustice. And when you see racism, when you see greed, when you see abuse, when you see all kinds of hatred, violence, you have to stand against that. Not just sit there, look at it, turn your face, and keep going. Now, because if you do, then you're accepting it. You're quietly accepting it. So that's one thing that Martin Luther King fought against, that mentality of acceptance of the wrong thing. And that's one of the most powerful things that I did have gotten from his teachings, is that he stood against all the ills of the not only the United States but of the world of the time, and he voiced this opposition one by one, fearlessly, especially during the last years of his life. The last, I would say, period, the last maybe a couple of decades of his life, he gathered up his strength, his valor, and began to speak against things that were huge, big. For example, he spoke against the war, against the Vietnam War. And this, many think, ultimately cost him his life. But he was so determined that even that very threat didn't stop him. So that's what makes him such a special person, such a giant, such a person that is basically a person that cannot be forgotten, is a person that will remain as part of our history, as part of world history, basically for the remainder of humanity. So that valor is something that many people don't know about him, because they may not know many of the details of his story. And again, I encourage you to follow that and to look for it and to read about it. No matter who you are, where you're from, what your race is, what your background is, you can learn a ton from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It doesn't matter if you're not even from America. It doesn't matter if you're not an American. I'm not born an American. I mean a United States American. Yes, I was born here in the continent of America, but I wasn't born here in the continental US. However, when I learned about Martin Luther King, it does, his story, his teachings, his thoughts apply to everyone, including me. It doesn't matter what your background is, whether you were oppressed or not, whether you were part of a, injustice or not. You could be part of the problem and learn from him so you can find solutions. Or you could be a victim of the problem and learn from him to also find solutions. So I will keep it at that. I have a lot more to say about him, and probably I will keep going, maybe in another video. But to keep it short, I wanted to share that and let you know that there is so much to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. than what you hear in school or in little conventions and speeches and little gatherings about him out on the street. You need to dig in, and his teachings go deep, pretty much deeper than the average person could grasp. And me, of course, I have only scratched the surface, and perhaps many of you also have. Perhaps many of you have gotten deep into his teachings, but I believe it is quite hard to grasp the whole depth of his teachings. I mean, they go that deep, and it takes pretty much a lifetime of training to basically grasp, and reach his level. It is possible, and I encourage each and every one of you, if you would like to go that route, to attempt to reach his level. It is not impossible, but it takes it takes remarkable courage. It takes remarkable valor. It takes unbelievable valor and courage. Those are the two things that come to mind that I believe are required to attempt to follow his footsteps. Everything else will follow, I believe. And that's what I wanted to say on this day. Thank you very much.